Restricted zones are supposed to stay still. A closure line goes up, a warning sign appears, and the boundary remains where it is until the land becomes safe again. But across America, a stranger pattern has begun to appear. Places where the restricted areas don't shrink, they grow. A fence in the high desert that moves a few feet every year, even though no one reports adjusting it. A no-fly box above New Mexico that keeps expanding into civilian airspace. A red zone on a mountain that widens with every season, swallowing routes that climbers used for decades. And lakes, ridges, drainages, and desert corridors quietly gaining ground without storms, quakes, or erosion to explain why. Ask an official and they'll give you a reason. Wind patterns, atmospheric tests, seasonal instability. Ask someone who works the land every day, and they'll tell you the truth. These places didn't just change, they changed the borders around them. 6 zones. 6 places where the restricted lines aren't holding still anymore. 6 reasons the map no longer matches the ground. Lock the doors, put on your headphones, and pull your blanket tight around you, because after this video, you'll never see America's restricted lands the same way again. The expanding closure line at Bryce Canyon's East Rim. Bryce Canyon's amphitheaters look fixed, frozen waves of orange and white limestone carved over millions of years. But the East Rim, a quieter, less visited edge of the park, has been shifting in a way rangers can't easily explain. The closure line there doesn't stay put. It grows. The first record of the expansion appears in a 2006 maintenance log. A ranger noted that a seasonal closure sign, placed to protect hikers from winter instability, had been moved 10 feet uphill from its original installation point. No one signed off on the relocation. No weather event justified it. The sign simply wasn't where it had been left. Assuming a visitor had tampered with it, staff replaced the post and drove it deeper into the soil. By spring, the boundary had moved again, now 22 feet from where the original marker stood. In 2009, the park updated its trail maps. The East Rim closure expanded by nearly a quarter mile. The official explanation cited erosion risk, yet no major events had occurred. Soil testing showed typical seasonal variation, nothing severe enough to justify such a large jump. The following year, a geologist hiking the area noticed something stranger. The boundary didn't match the terrain. The unstable zone avoided cliff edges and instead carved a strange serpentine path through stable high ground. It was as if the closure was shaped by something underground, not by visible danger. In 2013, technology made the pattern clearer. A GPS survey team mapped the boundary and found subtle elevation anomalies. 1 to 3 inches of uplift across several points within the restricted zone. Too little to notice by eye, too much to be random. When they returned the next season, the uplift had widened and the closure line was extended again. Then came the missing log incident. In 2016, a ranger named Eli Monroe filed a routine hazard report for a small sinkhole near the East Rim. It was shallow, harmless, and far from any trails. The next morning, his log entry had been moved to a different folder, a restricted one that rangers couldn't access without supervisor clearance. When he asked why, the supervisor said the report didn't exist yet. 3 weeks later, the closure zone expanded over the exact area he had documented. Visitors began noticing the new perimeter. They asked, "What happened here?" Rangers offered standard language: erosion, frost heave, stabilization. But internally, something else was happening. A pattern emerged in drone footage collected for erosion analysis between 2017 and 2020. In layered comparisons, the East Rim seemed to breathe, shallow ridges shifting by inches every year, subtle enough to go unnoticed unless you stacked the frames. Soil scientists proposed a frost expansion effect. Geologists countered that the terrain wasn't the right composition. Wildlife staff observed no burrowing species large enough to reshape Earth at that scale. Then, in 2021, a ranger stationed near the East Rim at dawn heard a deep, resonant sound echoing through the restricted zone. Not wind, not rockfall, something slower. A low vibration that rose for several seconds, then stopped abruptly, like pressure releasing underground. Later that season, hikers outside the closure line reported feeling the ground flutter, as if a soft tremor pulsed beneath their boots. The park issued no statement. Today, the East Rim's restricted area is nearly triple its original size. It expands in irregular arcs, never retreating, never stabilizing. Each year, new markers appear farther upslope, placed not by rangers, but because the updated hazard maps instruct them to. As one veteran ranger put it, "We're not expanding the closure. The land is telling us where the new line goes." And when the new boundary appeared overnight, the old one was already gone. The growing no-fly box above White Sands. Restricted airspace is nothing unusual over White Sands. For decades, the range has hosted missile tests, high-altitude research, classified flights, and atmospheric experiments. Pilots who fly near southern New Mexico know the shape of the airspace by heart. Long rectangles of sky closed during active operations. But around 2018, something changed. The no-fly box above the northern sector began to grow. At first, the expansions were tiny, a few hundred feet added to the boundary, logged quietly in FAA updates. Pilots barely noticed. But by early 2020, the restricted area had widened multiple times, creeping outward in strange, uneven arcs that didn't match any known test pattern. A retired Air Force pilot watching the changes said, "Ranges expand all the time. They don't do it like that." The first odd report came from a civilian drone operator flying legally just outside the boundary. As his drone approached the edge of the airspace, its autopilot abruptly activated, forcing the craft into a return-to-home sequence. There was no signal loss, no interference warning, just an override, as if the drone suddenly decided it had crossed into forbidden air. Footage from the flight log showed something stranger, a faint distortion ripple across the horizon, heat haze, maybe, but moving in a straight vertical line. Weeks later, a group of geology students hiking near the missile range saw what looked like a distant, shimmering column rising into the sky. They assumed it was dust or heat. But when they checked the FAA notices that night, the restricted airspace had expanded again, exactly over the location of the sighting. In 2021, small private aircraft began reporting sudden compass drift when approaching the new boundary. Not a full spin, just a subtle pull, a few degrees off, corrected only after the aircraft turned away. One pilot described it as leaning towards something in the sky. White Sands denied any anomalies. They cited routine atmospheric testing. But internal FAA notes, later leaked through pilot forums, showed air traffic controllers receiving intermittent radar returns inside the no-fly zone. Blips that appeared briefly, stationary, then vanished. Some returns showed altitude changes too smooth and too rapid to match aircraft. Whatever they weren't storms, birds, or drones. Another expansion came in midsummer, this time larger than all previous ones combined. Aviation blogs speculated on advanced missile prototypes. Military watchers suggested high-altitude balloon tests, but one line in the FAA notice stood out. Increased vertical activity expected. Vertical activity. Not vertical hazards, not vertical traffic. Activity. The wording had no precedent. In 2023, a wildfire crew working near the boundary reported radio interference whenever their helicopter crossed a specific invisible line. Their frequencies dissolved into a low, pulsed hum, steady, mechanical, and impossible to trace. When the pilot pulled back, the radio cleared instantly. Every time they crossed the same point, the hum returned. Later that year, a meteorologist reviewing weather balloon data noticed atmospheric readings above the no-fly box showed a pocket of air several degrees warmer than the surrounding sky. Not a thermal plume, not a jet wash, but a persistent, nearly geometric column of heat, as if something above the range was generating warmth in a fixed vertical corridor. White Sands expanded the airspace again. Today, the no-fly box covers an area nearly double its size from a decade ago. It stretches higher, wider, and deeper than any known test zone in the continental United States. Each expansion comes with the same vague justification, operational necessity. But the patterns don't match weapons testing. They don't match research flights. They don't match anything routine. One controller who reviewed the radar logs put it quietly. Whatever's up there needed room to grow, but whatever they're hiding up there needed more sky. The moving fence line in Nevada's high desert. Across Nevada's high desert, long stretches of BLM fencing mark grazing boundaries, wildlife corridors, and survey zones. Most of these fences haven't moved in decades. Ranchers know every post, every bend, every gate by heart. But near a remote basin east of Tonopah, a single fence line has begun to drift. It started small. In 2014, a rancher noticed a section of fence standing several feet inside his grazing allotment, farther inward than when he last checked it. He assumed vandals or wind had knocked it loose, but when he examined the posts, they were firmly set. The soil around them was undisturbed, packed tightly, as if the posts had been planted there for years. When he contacted the BLM office, they insisted no employees had adjusted the boundary. The file for that section showed no recent maintenance. 2 months later, the fence shifted again, this time nearly 12 feet. And again the posts were solid, the wire taut, the soil untouched. A field officer finally visited the site. He inspected every post, noting something odd. The dates stamped into the metal caps didn't match. Some caps showed 1997, others 2008, yet the weathering on each section looked identical. No sun fade differences, no rust variations. It was as if the entire stretch had aged at the same rate, regardless of when its pieces were made. The BLM marked the incident as boundary discrepancy, unresolved. In 2017, wildlife biologists tracking pronghorn noticed their animals avoided the shifting fence line. Collared individuals walked parallel to it, but never crossed, even though the fence had previously marked a neutral corridor. The pronghorn didn't behave like they were blocked. They behaved like the land beyond the fence had changed. Then the GPS offsets began. Biologists walking near the fence reported their units drifting by up to 40 feet whenever they stepped inside the newly expanded perimeter. Step back outside, and the coordinates corrected instantly. One tech described it as the land refusing to be measured. A seismic technician sent to evaluate the soil recorded micro-tremors, short bursts of vibration lasting less than a second, repeating at irregular intervals. Not earthquakes, not mining activity, something closer to pressure changes underground. When he attempted a deeper reading, the equipment crashed, producing a corrupted file with a single line intact. Signal source inconsistent with terrain. In 2019, a drone pilot hired to film rangeland health flew over the basin. The drone captured a perfect grid of desert until it approached the wandering fence. Then the video feed shimmered, like heat distortion in a straight vertical line. The drone's altitude suddenly dropped 20 feet on telemetry, even though the video showed no descent. It auto-returned seconds later. The pilot sent the footage to the BLM. It was never added to his project archive. Meanwhile, the fence kept moving. By 2022, ranchers measured nearly 40 yards of drift from its original line, always in the same direction, always deeper into the basin. A BLM supervisor finally marked the area as temporary restricted, citing environmental monitoring. Ranchers weren't convinced. The land was stable, no new erosion, no ground collapse, no known hazards. But the strangest incident came last year. A ranger walking sunrise patrol noticed fresh boot prints, his own, leading from the main road straight toward the fence. Even though he hadn't been in the area for weeks, the prints stopped at the boundary and continued on the other side in a slightly different pattern, like his stride had changed mid-step. He checked his radio. The signal cut out the moment he crossed into the expanded perimeter. Some believe an underground cavity is slowly shifting. Others think magnetic anomalies are warping GPS data, but none of those explanations account for the fence itself. Posts that don't lean, soil that doesn't shift, boundaries that move without disturbance. One biologist put it plainly. The wildlife didn't change their path for the fence. The fence changed its path for something else. Because the fence didn't move for wildlife, it moved for something else. The expanding red zone on Mount Shasta's north face. Mount Shasta has inspired stories for more than a century. Underground chambers, lost civilizations, spiritual retreats. Most of that belongs to folklore. But the red zone on the mountain's north face, the one quietly expanded by the Forest Service over the last 20 years, is entirely real. The first closure was small, a narrow band around unstable ice caves formed by fumaroles and melt tunnels. Seasonal, predictable, ordinary. But in 2008, rangers noticed fractures appearing farther upslope than expected. They stretched the closure boundary by a few dozen yards. No one thought much of it. Then the fractures kept moving. In 2011, climbers reported that established routes they'd used for years had vanished under fresh instability markers. Rock that had been solid for decades suddenly carried hairline cracks. A glacier edge that typically retreated in summer appeared to have shifted sideways instead, something glaciologists couldn't explain. A structural assessment that year noted unusual thermal inconsistency inside upper melt caverns. The full document was partially redacted. By 2013, the red zone expanded again, this time by nearly a quarter mile. The Forest Service cited increased hydrothermal activity, yet the USGS monitors showed no major temperature spikes. No new vents, no steam events. Something underground was moving, but not in a way that matched volcanic behavior. Climbing guides began complaining that the closure line made no geometric sense. The boundary arced around stable stone and instead cut through areas with no recorded hazards. One guide said, "It feels like someone drew the line to avoid something, not protect us from something." Then came the missing log incident. A ranger named Judith Hale recorded a thermal anomaly near a snow bridge, a reading that showed a sudden 5-degree rise without any visible source. When she checked the digital log the next morning, the entry had been reassigned to another region of the mountain, a region she hadn't visited. Her supervisor brushed it off as a clerical error. Hale wasn't convinced. In 2016, a drone team performing post-storm inspection captured a series of thermal images that puzzled analysts. A band of warmth appeared beneath the snowpack, stretching in a curved line parallel to the red zone, almost like a buried tunnel or channel of heat. When the drone returned on a colder day, the warm band had shifted slightly upslope. This was the first clue that the red zone was not just spreading, it was following something. The most unsettling event occurred in 2019. Their climber descending early in the season radioed in, reporting a low hollow resonance coming from beneath the ice. He described it as not rockfall, not thawing, more like the mountain exhaled. He reached base camp shaken but uninjured. His report was logged and immediately flagged pending review. It never reappeared. Later that year, a new ranger scanned the north face during a routine flyover. She noticed that the closure boundary had expanded again, even though no announcement had been issued. The updated internal map showed a new arc drawn around an area that had never recorded instability before. When she asked about it, the response was a short, uneasy, "Just follow the new line." By 2023, the red zone had tripled in size compared to its original boundaries, and yet the mountain shows no signs of imminent eruption. No magma movement, no vent formation, just shifting heat signatures, migrating fractures, and closures that grow in curved, intelligent-looking paths. A veteran ranger summed it up the way only someone who has worked the mountain for decades could. "The red zone isn't protecting us from danger, it's marking where the mountain decided to change. And every year the mountain takes a little more back." The restricted lake that grows a foot wider each season. High in the Sawtooth Wilderness, tucked between two jagged ridgelines, sits a lake so small and unremarkable that it never earned an official name. Rangers call it Mirror Lake for the way it reflects the cliffs around it. But over the last decade, the lake has done something no alpine lake in Idaho should do. It keeps expanding, not rising, expanding. The first measurement came in 2012, when a fisheries biologist marked the shoreline at multiple points to track seasonal fluctuations. Snowmelt explains annual increases, but that year the lake didn't recede fully by autumn. It stayed a few inches wider than before. Odd, but not alarming. Then it happened again the next year, and the next, and the next. By 2017, the lake had grown nearly 3 feet beyond its original diameter. Rangers blamed changing runoff patterns, warmer springs, heavier snowpack, earlier thaws. But Mirror Lake sits in a bowl-fed basin with no underground inlet and no outlet stream. Hydrologically, it shouldn't grow. It should overflow, but it never did. In 2018, a fire crew passed through during a backcountry rotation and noticed the waterline extended farther into the tree line. Ponderosa roots that should have been dry were submerged partway, yet the ground around them wasn't muddy or softened. It was compact and undisturbed, as though the lake had always reached that far. The next year, 2 anglers reached the lake at dawn and felt a pressure shift as they stepped near the water's edge. Not altitude sickness, not weather, a deep, subtle sensation in the ears, like the air had thickened. When one cast his line, the ripples remained unusually tight, as if pulled inward rather than spreading out. They told a ranger, who noted the odd behavior but dismissed it as wind distortion. There was no wind that morning. In 2020, a hydrology team set depth markers to compare readings over time, But when they returned later that season, the markers were gone, not washed away, not tilted, simply gone. No drag marks, no footprints, no sign of water level disturbance. The stakes seemed to have been removed deliberately. The team replaced them. 3 weeks later, the new markers vanished as well. Forest Service logs never recorded an official explanation. Then came the shoreline anomaly. In 2021, a geologist analyzing satellite imagery noticed something troubling. The lake didn't grow in random patterns. It expanded in near-perfect concentric arcs, as if the shoreline adjusted itself like rings on a tree. Natural lakes never do this. They warp, they bulge, they erode unevenly. Mirror Lake expanded like a diagram. In 2022, a ranger wading knee-deep for a water sample reported a strange sensation. The lakebed felt spongy, almost responsive. When she shifted her weight, she felt the sediment give slightly beneath her, then firm again, as if the ground had adjusted to her presence. She returned the next week with a co-worker. The lake had widened another 6 inches. The most unsettling event occurred last summer. A group of hikers sitting at the lake's edge reported hearing a dull, rhythmic thump beneath the water. Not bubbles, not shifting rocks. A pulse, slow even, unmistakable. They recorded audio, but the microphone captured nothing except faint static, as if the sound existed only through physical contact with the water. When rangers tested the lake themselves the next morning, the pulsation had stopped, but the basin had stretched again, another foot of expansion traced in the damp line left on the rock. Forest Service officials insist the lake's growth is a climate-related shoreline adjustment. Hydrologists disagree privately. There is no new inflow, no new groundwater, no erosion pattern that matches the arcs, and no geological process that causes a lake to widen cleanly without raising water level. One ranger said it best while comparing old survey maps. It's not filling, it's not flooding, it's claiming space. Because the lake wasn't rising, it was expanding. The desert corridor that lengthens every summer. The Sonoran Desert is full of straight lines that don't belong to nature. Border roads, patrol routes, service corridors for power lines and pipelines. Most are mapped, measured, and maintained with military-level precision. But south of Ajo, Arizona, there's a corridor that refuses to stay the same length. Border Patrol agents call it the Stretch. It's a narrow, hard-packed service road used for sensor maintenance. No public access, no tourist traffic, no hikers. The road runs dead straight across flat desert for just under 2 miles. At least that's what it used to be. In 2015, a maintenance crew noticed their mileage logs didn't match. A segment that should have been 1.9 miles read as 2.03. They recalibrated their truck's odometer. Same reading. When they checked older logs, they found something stranger. The corridor's length had been slowly increasing for years. Inches at first, then feet. In 2017, a second crew measured the same road using GPS. The reading came back 2.1 miles. The supervisor blamed GPS drift, a common desert problem. But when they walked the corridor using a calibrated measuring wheel, the result was almost identical. Something about the corridor had changed. The first physical anomaly was recorded in 2018, when a patrol agent noticed sensor towers standing slightly farther apart than usual. The spacing difference was tiny, maybe 2 feet, but unmistakable. The steel footing plates were flush with the ground, untouched, unshifted. No erosion, no movement marks. It was as if someone had lifted the towers, spread them apart, and set them back down perfectly. The agency replaced one tower. 3 months later, the spacing had changed again. By 2019, drones flying low over the corridor recorded a faint distortion effect along the ground, a shimmer, like heat, but confined to a narrow line that didn't follow temperature gradients or wind. Some analysts suggested a mirage. Others pointed out that the shimmer showed at dawn, when the air was cold. Then came the sensor anomalies. Buried seismic monitors meant to detect human or vehicle movement began triggering in perfect intervals, 10 seconds apart, then 20, then 30, like a metronome. When field techs dug up one of the monitors to check for damage, they found the casing warm to the touch, even though the surrounding soil was cool. The logs were archived, then quietly reassigned to a calibration folder. In 2020, the corridor lengthened again, another 8 feet. Patrol vehicles began logging compass drift near the midpoint, subtle but consistent. Dashcams caught moments where distant mountains appeared slightly offset from their real position, as if the horizon bent for a fraction of a second. Agents joked that the desert was stretching. No one laughed when the next expansion reached 20 feet. The most unsettling event occurred last summer, during extreme heat. A maintenance crew walking the corridor on foot reported the ground beneath them felt loose, even though it looked solid. One man described it as walking on tightly packed sand that moved a breath too late. When they returned the next day with inspection gear, the soil had rehardened, but the corridor measured longer. Again, satellite imagery hasn't helped. Comparisons from year to year show the road extending, slowly, subtly, with no construction, no erosion, no visible alteration to the surrounding terrain. It just continues. Border agents avoid walking the midpoint now. They say radios falter there, not with static, but with a strange hollow tone, like the device is picking up an echo from underground. When a supervisor was asked if the corridor was shifting due to faults or subsidence, he shook his head. Faults don't stretch things evenly, and they don't do it every summer. No official report mentions the anomaly. No correction has been issued to the corridor's length, and yet every measurement, independent, mechanical, digital, visual, shows the same trend. The road is growing, and whatever is causing it seems tied to heat, silence, and a stretch of desert that resists being pinned down on a map. And by the time they measured it again, the desert had grown. 6 places where the land didn't just shift, it rewrote its own borders. A canyon rim that moves without storms. A slice of sky expanding beyond pilot charts. A fence line that wanders across a basin with no human hand on it. A mountain whose danger zone grows even when the volcano sleeps. A lake widening in perfect circles, as if something beneath it is breathing. And a desert road lengthening every summer, stretching into silence like it remembers a shape we don't. These aren't stories about danger. They're stories about change. Slow, subtle, and unnerving. Places where measurements can't be trusted, where boundaries pull away from the map. Where the ground answers to something older than policy, and older than the people trying to chart it. Most of us think land is permanent, that what we see today is what existed yesterday. But these restricted zones remind us that the Earth still moves in ways we aren't ready to understand, and that not every expansion is made by human hands. Thank you for traveling deeper into the series with me. If one of these places stayed with you, leave a like. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, which US state, park, or forbidden zone should we investigate next? Your ideas genuinely shape where this series goes. Some borders protect us, some warn us, and some are growing for reasons the maps haven't caught up to yet.